1984 was George Orwell's novel, in which he said that computers would be the tools of big governments and corporations. They'd be like Big Brother and control us. Steve Jobs believed that the computer would empower the individual. And that to him was what the Macintosh was all about, and that's why he loved the 1984 ad.
I grew up drawing a lot, taking a lot of art classes and design classes, and didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it. And then I found advertising, which was kind of fascinating because it was artistic, but it was also storytelling, and it was also ideas. Every time we did a project, we were going to do something breakthrough. We were going to do something brave and different and surprising and talked about. I'm Lee Clow, and I was the creative director on the 1984 Apple commercial.
Probably the most prolific Super Bowl ad of all time is the Apple 1984 ad. It was the birth of the Oh Wow Super Bowl ad. It was kind of the first time any advertiser took what I'll call a big, epic, cinematic view of advertising. It was done in such a bold, interesting, provocative way. It was wow.
We've been working for Steve Jobs and Apple Computer for a number of years, but the Macintosh, this product that we were going to introduce to the world, this little guy, was his greatest accomplishment so far. He believed that he had invented the computer that everyone could use.
This is a major new market that we think this technology is going to create.
And it was incredibly important to him that we did something as bold as he thought the product he was introducing was. And he said, I want something great. I want something, that nobody else would do.
It was Ridley Scott that shot this amazing director.
Lee Clow and Steve Jobs convinced Ridley Scott, who had done Blade Runner, some sci-fi wonderful movie, to do something that was so unlike any other ad. And they came up with this idea that they were going to show some science fiction, dystopian, bad future, and then the individual would run in and save us from Big Brother.
And we showed it to Steve, and he instantly said, I love it.
Apple went ahead and purchased 2 ad spaces for Super Bowl XVIII. But inside the company's boardroom, not everyone was sold on the 1984 idea.
When the board of directors saw the ad, they were horrified, and they said, sell back the time.
There always are people who kind of want to jump out there and say, oh, I don't know, that was kind of weird, that was strange. They're introducing a product and they're competing with IBM and they don't even show the product. What's the matter with them?
The board's distaste for the ad was fueled further by poor results from test audiences. While an average score for a commercial was 29, the Apple 1984 ad scored a 5.
Steve Jobs always hated the concept of focus groups. He said it's not the customer's job to know what they want, it's our job to show them what they want.
But in 1984, Steve Jobs' beliefs took a back seat to the power of the board. Jobs and Lee Clow grudgingly sold back one of the ad spaces, but wisely held on to the other.
We just kind of dragged our feet and hung on to this one spot, and luckily, Steve and I conspired a little bit, or kind of, with a wink and a nod, said we can't sell the last spot, and it got to run once.
The Los Angeles Raiders won Super Bowl XVIII.
Setting him wide left, he has to reverse his field, but he gets away for a moment, comes back up the middle of 30, 25, 40, breaks past 2 men at the 50. The celebration will begin as the Raiders sprint toward the clubhouse.
However, their victory wasn't the only topic of conversation from the big game.
And there was people saying on the news the next morning, well, the game wasn't great, but did you see the commercial? And the commercial that we did kind of started this role of the Super Bowl becoming this platform for interesting advertising.
And it set the stage and is kind of the measuring stick of all future Super Bowl ads.
From Cindy Crawford sipping a Pepsi to Budweiser Clydesdales kicking field goals. For over 30 years, companies have been trying to capture their own 1984 moment.
And that is the value of the Super Bowl. Nobody's sitting around watching the Super Bowl and a commercial comes up and they're flipping the channel.
Everyone's kind of trying to outdo each other with something that people will talk about and people like.
Oh, did you like the Coke commercial? Did you like the Budweiser? Oh, I thought this commercial was terrible. And so it becomes part of the experience.
So one of the things that still amazes me is 30 years ago, we introduced this little piece of technology to the world, believing it could change everything. So today, I carry the 1984 commercial around with me on my phone. So if anyone asks me, what was that commercial you did in 1984? I can just whip it out and hold it up and let people take a look.
What the ad did was inject Steve Jobs' DNA into the soul of Apple. It became a company that was rebellious, that was for misfits and round pegs and square holes, but people who wanted to control their own destiny.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Doesn't that blow your mind?
Now, I've always regarded commercials in the entire time I've been doing commercials. I've always thought of them because I didn't come from advertising. I came from BBC. So I've always come into commercial advertising and looked at each commercial as a film, right? As a little filmlet. Always have done, and I always will do, I guess. Okay, too late to change now. But I looked at it from a point of view. The first idea was dealing with the look of the thing. And instead of doing a contemporary, absolutely contemporary idea of future, I thought it was more interesting to look back at, I think it was done in the 40s, Alexander Korda's Shape of Things to Come, right? And I thought that, to me, if you take those interiors, which are slightly decadent looking, even though, with all their gloss and all their kind of, what was then marvelous architecture and now looks archaic as architecture, I thought that was an interesting look.
Well, what was your reaction when you first saw the board?
The board, I thought, one of two things. I thought, my God, they're mad, because this is terrific from a filmic point of view, and I know exactly how to do a kind of pastiche on what 1984 may be in dramatic terms rather than factual terms, right? And so I thought it was such a dramatic idea that it would either be totally successful or would all get put in state pen.
Were there bits of things that you'd done in Alien that found their way into 84?
Yeah. Because in Alien, the whole process of Alien on the Nostromo, the spaceship, the ship itself, not the alien ship, it became a sculptural problem as to how do you make those corridors look businesslike and real. And so what we did very simply, finally, is in frustration, we bought 3 aircraft and dismantled them. And those 3 big jet bombers actually were then assembled in the corridors in the sculptural process, and that's why it looked very businesslike.
Yes.
Now, those 2 big blank walls at the back of the main auditorium in 1984, we hauled in those huge 747 engines and just hung them on the wall. And they looked like, what did they look like? I don't know, they looked like ducts.
Air conditioning ducts,
Yes.
Yeah, right. Some kind of industrial something or other.
Yeah, so that is to me what I call good dramatic bullshit.
Did you have any thoughts on the girl that, as you looked at the board, what sort of person that would be? Let's start there and work back to the...
Yeah, no, as you remember, one of the main problems was actually, funny enough, finding a girl who could throw a hammer and look businesslike. And so that immediately narrowed down the field, apart from the fact she had to look great. It narrowed down the field, I think, almost immediately to athletes, because we went through the whole process of having, models come in and actresses come in.
Those Hyde Park days of...
The Hyde Park days of casting, which was actually very pleasant. But we finally narrowed it down to actually seeing athletes, discus throwers, hammer throwers, and she really was, I think, out of everybody we saw, was really the only one, who looked right and could handle herself.
How about the skinheads?
One of their trademarks seems to be, it's like a combination of almost like a punk look. For some reason or other, they all seem to walk around with shaved heads. And so we organized one of these rather frightening casting sessions where there were about 300 or 400 youths.
Yeah.
And I was surprised how elderly some of them were.
Yeah.
I thought it was tended to be a kind of youth movement, but it's not at all.
I think we had 3 generations of them.
Absolutely, yeah. And we chose 150 skinheads out of that group.
Yeah. How about Big Brother?
Big Brother, at first, well, when we got into the process of where would the speech come from,
right?
Because the speech wasn't really written up.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think it worked out very well. It's a great speech. Where did it come from?
Steve Hayden, manufactured that. Yeah.
It's terrific. And because what we discussed at that point is why not have up the image of Karl Marx, which I guess is what 1984 is vaguely focusing on.
Sure.
Yeah. And so that was the first idea. So the brief to the casting director was just that. And so the notion at that stage was to get somebody with pale, I think Marx had pale red hair, didn't he?
Yes.
Faded red hair and a little goatee beard. I thought of going to that extent, but then when I actually saw the guy who came in, he was enough. He's interesting enough. He was given manic enough performance.
If you'd have had to double the budget on this one, what would you have done differently? Triple the budget?
Within the same 60-second slot?
Yeah.
Not very much. I think we nailed it.
I thought so, too.
Yeah.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives we have created for the first time in history.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives we have created for the first time in all history. A garden of pure ideology where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of vain contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people. One will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.